Hello, let's do a quick discussion of the Light of Impossible Stars, number 3 in the Embers of War series by Gareth L. Powell, a space opera series that purportedly is concerned with the nature of war, the nature of being able to right yourself, to come back, to have some kind of redemption, though really that is all a masquerade. To get it right out in the open at the beginning of this review, I find this is a pretty flawed series. I'm going to try and confine myself to talking about this Light of Impossible Stars, the final book in the series. That said, you would actually have to it is not something that is a standalone book. It is basically one long story. The three books, all about. There has been a giant war amongst the human beings. A giant war, the biggest war there ever has been, even though it doesn't seem to be fully explained. There is a war crime that is committed in the first book that ends that. And this is all the kind of the fall. This is all the fallout from that, with introduced into the mix in the first book of the marble fleet in the first book, which is this ancient fleet that has decided that it is going to bring peace to human beings, seemingly bring peace to human beings. As this comes up in the second book, by blowing all the other military and perhaps spacefaring stuff itself all out of the water, using a war criminal, Ona Sudak, as they're choosing them as the leader, knowing, I guess, full well what Ona Sudak likes to do, which is commit war crimes. So let's commit more war crimes to ensure peace. It's the classic let's blow up everything really good to make a lasting forever peace, which is utter nonsense. Add into this that the main motivation of the Marble Fleet for doing this is that they are fearing some higher dimensional being, which seem to be called void dragons, with they have diamond teeth, are able to exist in space, and like they're afraid that great violence will suck them in, will attract them to human beings and destroy everyone. Of course, their solution to making sure that there's no more wars is to attack everyone, and thus bring out more of these void beasts. And cut in the middle of all of this is the Trouble Dog, a sentient spaceship, retired spaceship from, it was a warship and is now joined the House of Reclamation, where it is captained by Sal Constance, who is a great granddaughter, I think it is, of the founder of the House of Reclamation, who is dealing with her own problems. She gets a crew member killed at the very beginning of the first book, and seems to be looking for some sort of kind of redemption throughout this. There's other characters that get introduced in the various books. When we get on to this third book, where it's like, oh crap, the Marble Armada is chasing Trouble Dog, and there's all these void dragons are coming out. It's like, oh god, everyone's going to come and crush them. How are they going to get out of this one? What Gareth L. Powell's strategy for that is to introduce an entirely new character into the mix in the third book, who perhaps is going to bring something new to the table, which will suddenly, will bring resolution to the book. And as a result of this new character, Cordelia Paw, into the book, that just squishes all of the other characters sort of out of the way. They have very much less time. You get some stuff with Sal and Trouble Dog and Lucy's ghost and Nod the Druff, who is this ancient creatures. These creatures who they come from a planet with the world tree, which they're just about work, and that if they don't have work, they literally do die. So having this escape valve off the planet actually allows them to live, in which case, if they wasn't that there, they would just simply have died and fell into the dirt to feed the great world tree, um, feed the great world tree there, and we find out that boy, they've really been around for a long time, and thus that gives another. That is actually maybe a more earned plot point that Gareth L. Powell brings in there. But at the same time, we have Cordelia Paw, who in herself is a good character, but I found myself through much of this book being kind of annoyed that she was pushing off all the other characters that I had gotten to know in the first two books off to the side. And yeah, just like kind of the introduction of her particular connections to this thing called the intrusion, which seems to be sort of kind of like almost a wormhole, which both the Void Dragons and the Marble Armada are both seem to be kind of not really. They don't want to. They want to stay out of that space. They feel there's something worried about there. So that really, yeah, Cordelia Paw sort of really takes it away. There's also the problem of villains in this book. Ona Sudak started off the first book as being a really interesting villain, and in the second book goes right back to being kind of murdering war criminal, like any kind of her moral dilemmas and stuff like that she seems to have solved in her own head, and just goes back to murdering people. And you just think, boy, her and the Marble Armada are dumbasses. I already mentioned it's like you're going to solve the problem of violence by doing way more violence, and thus bring the doom upon them all. And at the end of this book, Ona Sudak and the Marble Armada gets told off for this. But I'm like, yeah, I knew this from the beginning. This is the writer is pointing out the flaws in his own story and his own villains of how dumb they were. Doesn't make it any better that they were just so dumb and uninvolving. Ona Sudak became very cardboard. It was interesting in the first book as perhaps a war criminal who had gone on to be a poet and perhaps actually maybe have some thoughts and feelings and regrets and like, how do I kind of go on? But then just goes back to being a war criminal for books 2 and 3 and is really tedious, which is not what you want in your villain. Tedious and overpowered to the point of like, okay, yeah, there's no way we can resist them, until suddenly Cordelia Paw comes in from nowhere and is the thing that can save them all. While they're given a short shrift, I really do like Sal. I really like Trouble Dog, Lucy's Ghost. There's an introduction of a trans character, but because of how compressed things are, this new character doesn't particularly get any development, and they're as quickly in the story as that by the end, okay, they're completely out again, and we're just gonna tie that up. I probably felt I didn't like Nod too much in the first book because he was just a complainer. The Druff as general as a species kind of grew on me as more interesting, and I think that's the part that actually did go. But yeah, it's like all the secondary characters. There was a kind of a ship of characters surviving, kind of almost like a kind of a thriller. Thriller horror movie in the second book, but they just completely get kind of pushed out of the thing. There are, there's dream sequences from Cordelia Paw that are not great. I listened to it on audio, and I do think that this is the perfect way of having multiple different narrators doing the different things, helped kind of keep everything nicely apart that way in a production side. But I mean, the book is peppered with there's just like, I think Powell is like a really great pulp writer and writing adventure and kind of wacky stories, and this has got those elements in there. It's got a planet bigger on the inside, it's got space dragons, it's got fun pulp stuff, but when it gets down to kind of like ethical choices, and we'll have all these sections are broken up with deep classical literature, poetry in them, which you can really see the author reaching for seriousness when really all the storytelling instincts are to pulp, to fun, which being a fun writer is like a really would be a great thing, but cannot do serious, cannot do. I never for a moment thought it was like, oh, this is a deep exploration of war and its consequences, and how do you kind of write yourself as a person afterwards. Like, none of that comes through. None of that comes through. It's a silly story. It's a silly space story. And unfortunately, it's a silly space story that's not particularly well told. It really, really does fall apart in this third book here. And it's one of these things of like, well, I'll get into why I ended up listening to all three books. It was sort of an experiment that way. But it's one of those things of like, yeah, it's just like it's a steady right down for me for this series. There's some very kind of hyperbolic quotes on the covers of these things. I think Ann Leckie is saying, like, up there with Ian M. Banks and the great science fiction. Is like, no, this is kind of junky pulp that is trying to be serious and really isn't, and it's that trying for seriousness that really makes it groan. If it could be wacky and silly and pull things out of its ass, but not be asking me to try and take it seriously, I think it would have gone over better. But as is, oh, yeah. It's not a great entry for Gareth L. Powell. All right, those are my views. I'm sure people will quite disagree with me, and some will quite agree with me, as I can tell from Goodreads. But yeah, that's what I thought about it. All right, I've been Jay. More videos later.